Hi, I'm Ananya. I'm a junior content manager with Trip 101. Today, we're going to discuss another exciting destination, the land of fire and ice. And Ben is joining me today, Ben Pastore, to discuss this exciting destination of Iceland. So, welcome, Ben, to this session with us. We're quite excited to have you here.
Thank you, Ananya. Excited to be here.
Ben, before we deep dive into Iceland as a destination, I would like to know a little bit more about you. So please tell me where you're from, what do you do, and how did you end up becoming a traveler?
Okay, sure. I'm originally from Long Island, New York. I was born and raised there. For about the last almost 10 years, I've lived in Houston, Texas. Most of my life, I've been a volunteer minister, but I also needed something to pay the bills because as a volunteer, you don't get paid. I found early on that travel was, yeah, it was a job, it was also a passion. For many years, about 15 years, I worked as a travel agent for an agency in Southampton, Long Island. I found I was my best client because I was always looking to travel. Once you get the taste of it, that wanderlust takes over. And even in researching trips for other people, I found myself drawn to wanting to visit various destinations. I come from a family of travelers. My dad is always a big traveler. Learning to appreciate the various cultures, foods, landscapes. To me, this is what refreshes me. So once I started, this was probably in the late 90s, where I really got going. I was pretty much hooked from then on.
Okay. And when did you start documenting on your blog and on your social media channels?
Yeah, I realized at a certain point this was never the goal, but as I traveled, I had a whole bunch of firsthand experience that
Hmm.
could be very valuable. To date, I've traveled to 81 countries across all seven continents, and you learn a lot of things. I started, oh, I want to say maybe 2013. I started my Trip Accomplice blog and just started documenting just some of the lessons learned, destination pieces, showcasing them. And then just maybe a little over a year ago, I started creating some video content. Nobody wants to read anything anymore. They just want to watch it. And that coincided well when I had gotten a drone and started getting some drone photography. I always enjoyed travel photography as well. For the past probably dozen years, I've been a freelance travel writer. So basically, what happened was all this information I had, and people would ask me advice. I was like, they put it out there as a labor of love.
So it grew pretty organically. Like you started off as a travel agent and then you started traveling yourself, and then you had a lot of information that you wanted to share with everyone else.
Pretty much, yeah. Although
Yeah.
traveling, is something that I did. I'm from the United States originally. I traveled to all 50 states, and I got to see the country real well. There's differences in the regions, but when you go international, that's a big step forward. And that's what piqued my interest. So from the late 90s on, I had traveled a few places internationally up to then, maybe about five countries or so. But then it just, all right, let's get going.
What was your first international trip?
So technically, my first international trip, I was about 8 years old. My family went to Italy.
Uh,
And back in the the early 80s, it was a bigger deal than it is today. What I really liked about that trip, that as I recall now, is especially at that time, Europe was nowhere near as much of a travel destination or touristy destination as it is now. It
hmm.
was just authentic culture. We
Right.
spent some time on the island of Sicily, where my mom's from, and it was just really authentic. And sad to say, the continent's lost some of that as people become aware and travel more. But back then, that was a big deal to go to Italy.
So that was as a kid, you were like going back to also familiarize yourself with your roots because that's where your mom is from.
Yes.
Uh,
I was 8 years old. I didn't have much choice in the matter. They were going.
so then, as an adult, which was the first one that you yourself planned?
I'd done a trip. Gone on a cruise, some Caribbean islands with some friends. But the one I really planned myself was my honeymoon. This was 25 years ago. We had gone to Italy. My wife, her family is from an island off the coast of Italy called Ponza, a beautiful, under the radar, authentic Mediterranean island. And then from there,
Okay.
I planned a trip through Austria, Germany, France, and we ended up in England. This was the late 90s, 99, and we had the chance to sample all these destinations. That was the first one I really put the effort into.
Hmm.
And once that happened, I was hooked.
Okay. So Italy is where it all started for you.
Yeah, I guess you can say that. Literally, genetically, that's where it all started for me and took it from there.
Okay. And since you are yourself from Italy, at least your roots are, that's pretty great that all your significant journeys also landed up there. So let's get into discussing Iceland a little bit now. When did you do your trip to Iceland? Was it the first time that you were visiting?
Yes, the trip we're talking about was in September of 2023.
That's
I'd been wanting to get into Iceland for a while. I just had other priorities. And my wife, for example, she likes going warm places. So if you're looking for warm places, I wouldn't recommend Iceland. We had gone in September specifically because it's not the peak tourist season. It's a little bit warmer. Rates and accommodations were a little bit lower. Flights were a little bit lower. It was still within the period where we could hope to see the aurora borealis, the northern lights. So that factored into when we chose to go. So it was
Mm.
cool. At night it got cold, but it wasn't like it's going to be in a couple months. Yeah, basically just the shoulder season.
So did your wife, did you have to drag her to Iceland or did she?
No, we love the outdoors. We love natural beauty. Just being out in creation, we just enjoy that so much, even more than cities. We had a couple of friends that were going to join us, and we were going to do it in the format of a road trip because while there's a lot to see and really everywhere is beautiful, one of the best things about Iceland is that there are many gorgeous destinations one after another, and they're very easily reachable. My wife would have liked to be on the beach in a bathing suit. We did go to the beach, not in a bathing suit, but the natural beauty, I don't know how anyone could complain about that. That really was
Mm.
spectacular, and that was a motivating factor.
Yeah, I've seen some of the photos and videos on your channel. I don't think anyone has anything to complain as far as the beauty is concerned, for sure.
No, exactly.
Yeah. Back in when you were in your travel agent life, do you remember planning any trips to Iceland for anyone when you were doing that?
So at that time, Iceland really wasn't as popular as it's become. You saw Iceland starting to become featured in movies and TV shows, and that drew a lot of interest. Back when I was working in a travel agency, it was around when Iceland Air started up, and you could do a layover. So I had looked into it for some clients. I actually looked into it for myself as well. But at the time, it wasn't the popular destination that it's become.
Mm.
One of the things I noticed, and again, I wasn't there at the peak of tourist season, but the population of Iceland is probably only around 300,000. There are more tourists in the country than inhabitants.
Ah.
I got so you can see it's the country where they've become so popular, and for very good reason. It's clean, beautiful everywhere you look, but the infrastructure is still being developed to handle the influx of tourists. With social media and movies, you see these locations, and they really are even better in person than on your screen. It wasn't anywhere near as popular back then, but for good reason, it's gained its popularity.
Based on like what you had expected, like when you were doing your research, how did it turn out to be? Like when you were in Iceland experiencing it yourself, did it match up to what you had planned and thought of it?
Yes, I would say very much. There's so much content out now about it. Back then, there was maybe Lonely Planet Guide and maybe DK had one or Insight Guides, but now there's a lot more. And what I really appreciate is I was able to, in my research, find some off the beaten path. So the main tourist sites, I will say this, don't skip them. They really are worth visiting. Even though there'll be crowds, they're popular for a reason. It really,
Mm.
another point I should mention too, especially those with maybe have some limited mobility,
Mm.
many of the main sites are directly off what's called the ring road. So this is a road that goes all the way around the country, which is an island. You can see you're just driving and you see it over there, or you see this giant parking lot full of cars. So I was able to discover some spots that are a little off the beaten path, and
Mm.
those were my favorites. The country holds so many jewels. Like I said, it's just not as developed because of minimal population. And for instance, in the middle, I didn't even go in the middle. You need to have a special type of SUV to handle what's called the F roads, these gravel roads. But there's so many places tucked away. It doesn't take you long to get away from the crowds and be immersed in the natural landscape.
So the main attractions that you would want to visit, they're well connected and it would be easy to go around.
Yes. And for those who just don't want the aggravation, there are guided tours. There were tour buses that took them to all the spots. So that's an option as well. We decided to rent a car just to have the flexibility because even though September was a pretty good time of year to go, this is ultimately an island in the North Atlantic, and weather one day to the next can vary great. 1 hour to the next can vary greatly. So having the
Hmm.
flexibility, okay, we were going to go here today, but it's so nice. Let's go over here while we have the chance. That kind of flexibility helps out.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How long was your trip? How many days were you in Iceland?
About 10 days, 10 days. You can spend a lot more time there. Although I would say eventually you're just going to get variations on a theme. You're going to see a lot of glaciers. You're going to see a lot of volcanoes. You're going to see a lot of waterfalls everywhere. Eventually, just seeing more waterfalls, more glaciers. Some just stand out more than others. So I
Yeah.
would say it was a good amount of time. We didn't do the whole ring road. We just went about a third of the way around to the eastern side of Iceland, to the Jökulsárlón glacier. There's a glacier. It's basically about the size of Switzerland, and then made our way back. Then across to the west side. You have to forgive me. Icelandic is a very tricky language.
I will
The
not dare myself.
the Snæfellsnes Peninsula, I believe that's what's called. It's a peninsula north of Reykjavik, the capital. So we went out, across, and then back to Keflavik, which is where the international airport is, which is, you want to say, all the way the bottom left corner of the island. It's a little peninsula sticking out, maybe about 20
Hmm.
minutes from the famous Blue Lagoon, and the Grundavik, where we actually had lunch, where that volcano has been going off, closing everything down over there.
So in about 10 days, you were able to cover at least one third of the country.
Yeah, and more than that, I would say we hit the main sites. As far as the most popular, famous tourist destinations, we hit the important ones: Gullfoss, Skogafoss, Foss, the black sand beaches by Vik. We did a glacier hike. And Sneffelsnes Peninsula, there's a mountain I'm not even going to try to pronounce, this Kirkin something or other. It was a terrible day for weather for us that day, but we really, and the Blue Lagoon, we hit all the main sites that you come. They call it the Golden Circle. Again, I'm going to try to pronounce it. Thingvellir. It's one of the few UNESCO World Heritage sites there on Iceland. It has the history of the island there. So it was enough to see the highlights. If you really want to see every corner, you'll need more time.
So 10 days are enough to see the main stuff. And then, of course, if you want to see more, you go deeper into the country. And you mentioned that there's the central part where there are gravel roads for which you need a special vehicle and everything. So then that's a different, maybe it's a separate trip also altogether.
Yeah, in fact, while we were there, some friends of mine who had gone to Iceland years ago, they were also in Iceland at the same time. The first time they came, they just drove the ring road. This time, they spent their time in the interior. In fact, they
Hmm.
rented vans that are equipped to handle the gravel roads, but you also
Hmm.
can sleep in them in the back. So
Okay.
you can get to some pretty remote spots, very remote
Okay.
spots.
It depends upon the time you have and the type of traveler that you are, that you
Yeah,
can
exactly. Your level
decide.
of comfort.
When you landed in Iceland, the first day that you were there, you said the international airport is not in the capital city.
Keflavik is a peninsula. This was, I believe, an old U.S. Air Force base. That's where the international airport is. There is a Reykjavik airport, but that's more domestic flights and flights from, I believe, the Faroe Islands. But chances are, if you're an international traveler, you're going to come into Keflavik, the airport code KEF. While we were in the area, that's also where the famous Blue Lagoon is. The Majestic Peninsula is very geologically active. There's
Mm.
steam coming out. It looks like you're on the surface of the moon. That's just the landscape. It's quite fascinating. Since we weren't going to be there until the end, we decided to go for the Blue Lagoon. We thought, okay, this is going to be really touristy. And yeah, it's a big tourist attraction. And everything else in Iceland is pricey, but it really was so unique and even relaxing and enjoyable that despite the crowds, despite the prices, despite the touristy nature, we enjoyed it thoroughly.
Okay. So did you go straight from the airport to the Blue Lagoon?
Yes, we did. So at the Blue Lagoon, you're required to shower. They give you robes to use, which is good because it's cold. The water is nice and hot, and they have different pools and different sections with different water movement. It could be waterfalls or things that will help you just enjoy it. And there's various muds that you can put on and carry your skin and things like that. But again, since we were going to be, we were not going to be spending time in the area. And the only other time we're going to be passing by is on our way to our return flight, which is going to be really early in the morning. We're like, okay, let's do the Blue Lagoon now because it may be a 20-minute drive from the international airport, Keflavik.
Ah, okay. But it's also a cool way to get rid of your flight exhaustion.
Exactly. If you spend a lot of flights, at least from North America, will be coming overnight. So to get in and then just soak in this nice hot water and include a drink. So you go up to the bar, get a drink and put mud on your face. Not a bad way to start your Iceland trip.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really cool way. No, for sure. So once you were through with the Blue Lagoon, that's when you headed over to your first stop or checked into your accommodation first.
Yes, so we drove down through Grundavik, which is the town that's been shuttered down because of the volcanic activity,
Ah,
and headed out to a tiny town called Borg. I chose that one because of the accommodations, which is this cool dome tented hotel. We decided to visit the attractions by having a base of operations, something that we could go off in each direction, where it'd only be an
hmm.
hour or two to get to these places. So we didn't have to move around too much. So being east of Reykjavik, even east of Thingvellir, put us in a good location to visit sites like Gullfoss, Geyser, and Highfoss, all those spots.
So the first account was in Borg, and all the main attractions were pretty close, like a 1 hour drive or so.
Yeah, within that time, you could get to that. A lot of times from Reykjavik, they'll do the Golden Circle tours. They'll hit Gullfoss, Geyser, and Thingvellir in one day. We found just by being in the area, we had the flexibility where, okay, we're gonna go here now, go this place early. Matter of fact, we wanted to get there before the tour buses and came, and you really saw a difference. It's pretty empty, and then the tour buses
Yeah,
show up because they're all coming out of Reykjavik. So that was an advantage to staying in that
yeah,
area. Or
yeah.
Greens, I think it was called.
And you had your own, like you were driving around, so definitely that gave you the ease of planning it for your own convenience.
Absolutely. And especially to stay at a place like we stay, which is an Airbnb. From what I understand, there is a measure of public transport along the Ring Road, but to get to these places, you'd need to have your own transportation.
Okay. So which of the attractions you visited? You mentioned there's a waterfall. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce
Okay,
the
yeah.
name, but one of these is a waterfall and the other one is a national park.
Yes. So, well, the Golden Circle, this was in the early part of our trip. One day we went to Gullfoss. It's a river that hits a chasm and drops, but it's very impressive. It's a very large waterfall, raging rivers, very kind of windy even from the waterfall. So that was really beautiful. Just down the road is a town called Geyser, which is where all the other geysers in the world get their name. As you can imagine, this has the basically spouts of water, hot water that jit up. The original geyser has actually been dormant for quite some time, but there's one called the Stroker Geyser, where it's about every 5 minutes it
Oh.
erupts a big plume of water. So you don't have to wait too long, and it's impressive to see. And
Hmm.
then Thingvellir, we hit Thingvellir on the way back because we're cutting across. Thingvellir, again, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This was the place where the various clans of Iceland in ancient times would come together and meet, almost like a parliament. There's a term for it. I can't remember it, and even if I could, I'm sure I can't pronounce it. And it's also the spot where the North American and European tectonic plates meet. There's a spot there called Silfra. It's filled with crystal clear glacier water. And then you have North America on one side and Europe on the other. My friend did the snorkel. You could snorkel through the crack between North America and Europe. It isn't a whole lot to see, but it's a pretty cool experience, both literally and figuratively.
So was your friend able to see the difference, or is it something one perceives in a way?
It's basically a chasm. So you have just a wall of rock on one side, that's Europe, a wall of rock on the left side, that's North America. You're right between the plates. For those who don't want to be as chilly, you can also walk between the plates. There's one section where there's almost like a rift through the
Mm.
national park, and you're walking through that connection between the plates without having to go underwater. The underwater is just a whole lot more dramatic and one of those cool things to say you did.
But it's a significant geographical feature to witness the tectonic plates of the earth. You can see them for yourself.
You don't usually
Yeah.
have that kind of access to it.
Yeah. This is also the spot where you mentioned you can learn about the history of the nation because you said that the clans used to come together.
Yes, they have really nice visitor centers, clean restrooms, cafes, and souvenir shops. But also, if you wanted to, I believe there was a whole film you could watch about the site. For those looking to educate themselves on Icelandic history, that would probably be the premier spot for it.
Okay. Yeah, because the rest of the attractions, as you mentioned, they're more or less similar in nature because they're all natural features. And this one also because it has some heritage attached to it. So definitely,
Yes.
if one wants to learn about the history of the nation, that would be the spot. Yeah. So all of these were what you were visiting from your base and
Yes.
then
Well, we did Geyser and Gullfoss, and one day we also went to a little place. This is where YouTube helped me out. I was just looking for kind of off the beaten spots. A place called, again, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, Gjain. It was Gjain. It looked like you were just driving across the moon. It was almost like a barren, rocky landscape. And then all of a sudden, there's this little lush green valley of waterfalls. It was almost like someone scooped out the earth and created this little garden right there. And that was really nice. And nearby, further up that same river, is a pair of waterfalls called Hyfoss, a stunning gorge, a couple of feet, 100 feet high. Because of the refraction of light, you get beautiful rainbows. You visit the two together. So that was our first day. Our next day, we had gone down to another very popular site called Skogafoss, which is just a sheer waterfall. You can just see it right from the road. A lot of people take their selfies or kiss pictures in front of it. You can also climb a set of about 300 steps. It felt like everyone, but once you get to the top, not only are you given a nice viewpoint, but by following the trail, there are cascades after cascade behind me, just with waterfalls. And you go around a corner, and then there's more waterfalls, and there's a glacier up there on the top. So that was a beautiful spot. We'd also gone down by Vik, the beach, little town called Vik. That's a touristy area. It's not a bad place to base yourself out of as well. There's Reynisfjara Beach, the famous black volcanic sand beach. It has a lot of interesting sea stacks, like pillars of rock off the coast, and some interesting basalt columns in hexagonal shapes, and just again a lovely stretch of beach. Some other overlooks I can't pronounce over there. And then
So
heading back to our accommodations, we went to Seljalandafoss, a very famous waterfall, easily accessible from the ring road. Behind the waterfall, it's like a cave, concave, I should say. So you can walk behind the waterfall, it's spouting out, and then get in from all sides. Just around the corner from it is another waterfall called Brui, through a little crack in the rock, and you walk in. It's almost like a little secret room with the waterfall falling into this little cavern.
mm,
You want to hit them together. We did that just in one day.
day
Because
two was all about waterfalls for you.
yes, we definitely were chasing waterfalls.
Plus one beach, which your wife got
Yeah, so
as
she
a
got to go to the beach. It was too cold, and I should mention that it was a very calm day the day we were there, but there are warning signs. Just to be careful, because sometimes the surf can be rough and they'll have a rogue wave, so people will be by the water and they're not paying attention, and then North Atlantic comes and knocks them down and drags them out. So you do have to be careful. We had a really nice day, so we were fortunate.
okay.
I should mention too that anyone visiting the country in these major tourist spots has now been instituting paid parking. So you'll have to make sure that you pay for your parking because there'll be a lot of cars there. This money is going to infrastructure, which they need because they have so many visitors. Again, not too many people live in Iceland. Just be aware some of these spots you'll need to pay for
Mm,
parking, otherwise risk a
mm.
ticket.
Okay. Yeah. Especially if you're renting your own car and driving around, then that's something that you have to be mindful of as well. The
Exactly.
tour buses will probably take care of that for you.
They're on tour bus.
Yeah. So what did day three look like?
One of the things we done, we had booked a tour to go on a glacier hike. It's actually supposed to be an ice cave tour. And
Mm.
I was pretty disappointed. It was really awesome, but it wasn't as advertised. When I mentioned it to the operator, Troll Expeditions, they weren't very cooperative and it was very rushed. However, I would use a different tour operator than Troll, but to get up on the glaciers, and when the glacier is old and dense, it has a very beautiful blue color. Because we were at the end of the season, the cave that we are supposed to see was just a tunnel, just a hole you walk through, which was a little disappointing because that wasn't what we were paying for. But it was still pretty awesome. And you get the runoff, so you have these squiggly little rivers of blue through the white ice. And I'd also say the scale is pretty impressive. Just to take in this large ice field, and it's almost like Iceland is capped, has a big hat on it of all ice. And in fact, this is the Katla Glacier on top of a volcano that's well overdue to erupt. If that were to erupt, that would melt that ice real fast and cause flooding. The town has contingency plans, but it's a reminder that Iceland is very raw, nature in the raw. This is not like some of the other places in the world where it's a little more tame. This is raw, uncut, developing nature. Volcanoes and glaciers and rivers, this is all happening right here in front of your eyes.
Some of these geographical features which you read about it in school, that this is how they get formed.
Very
It's in
educational.
action right now in Iceland.
Very much. So from there, we started moving east. We stayed in a cabin in a town, which I'm not even going to try to pronounce, but it's further east along the south coast of Iceland. That was to give us access to the Jökulsárlón Lagoon, Diamond Beach, and the sites around there. So from Vik, about an hour and a half or 2 hours through, it was a moonscape, just like a very volcanic landscape, very empty, but beautiful in its own way. Very interesting rock formations and mounds and things like that. And again, this glacier over there is enormous, and there's little tongues of glaciers that come out through the mountains that you can have access to. Our main day for that area, we first went to a glacier called Fjallsarlin. It's near Jökulsárlón, which is more popular, has a lot more people. This one kind of has its own little enclosed lagoon. We went on a tour where you basically they kit you up with some very warm clothing, which was needed because you're going to visit a giant block of ice in Iceland. They take you across the lagoon in Zodiac, and you get up close to a bunch of icebergs that have broken off. And obviously, these are going to vary every trip because they're not uniform icebergs. This is just where it breaks off. And then right close to the face of the glacier, which is very imposing. And they'll even give you a chance to taste a little piece of glacier, like the purest water you can find. It was definitely worth the money, definitely worth just getting up close to it. And then after that, we went to the Jökulsárlón Glacier Lagoon, which was very lovely. And on the other side of the ring road is what's called Diamond Beach. It's called that because all the icebergs that are breaking off from the glaciers in Jökulsárlón Lagoon, they come through a channel and they break up more. And on the beach washes up these chunks of ice that kind of look like diamonds, like there's big shiny chunks of ice. So you can be walking around a black volcanic beach with huge chunks of ice. It's really very lovely. Just again, a very unique
Mhm.
that you don't get to see other places.
Yeah, it definitely sounds quite fascinating for sure. Like it's a beach covered with chunks of ice. Yeah.
Which you don't usually associate with beaches.
Yeah, exactly. Because you always think of like whenever you think of a beach, it's always like a tropical destination. Yeah, where you're it's warm.
So that's I should mention too, because this was a highlight for me. Heading back to our hotel or our little cabin that we rented, there was I if I hadn't done my research, I wouldn't have found it. There was a turnoff. No signs, at least not when I was there, no signs, but just a little road going off into a little valley. And that's the head of the trail for the Mulagulfur Canyon, which in my travels to date, I would consider the second most beautiful place I've ever seen. It really was up there in terms of so much beauty you can't comprehend. The hike from the parking lot, and again, it's not marked, you're basically just following a slope of this canyon. So it's low at that point because you're near the ocean, but then it rises dramatically. And it can be a little slippery at spots. At one point, you have to step your way across a river, like the river, so the stones in a river. So you need a little bit of sure-footedness to do it. But I'm not the slimmest or youngest of guys. I was able to get up there in about 45 minutes to an hour. Even if you do manage to catch your breath, you're going to lose it as soon as you see that valley. There's one giant waterfall right ahead of you, a couple hundred feet high, and all sorts of birds circling around. Deep in the canyon is another beautiful waterfall with dark volcanic, so it stands out. Some of the greenest scenery you'll see. It looked like something out of a fantasy novel. We'll do a couple of drone runs over there. It was just absolutely spectacular. I was really impressed. I'm so glad I did my research ahead of time. Otherwise, you would miss it.
It's not a popular attraction, the canyon.
It's not as well known. There was a
Oh,
bunch of cars there, so
hmm,
clearly somebody knew about this, and there was
hmm.
plenty of other people. Not as packed as some other locations. But for instance, off the Ring Road, there wasn't even a sign. But if you go there, it's just so beautiful. I'm sure it's just a matter of time before that becomes a staple. Unlike, again, so Jalandafoss or Skogafoss, even Diamond Beach, it's going to take you some time to get up to have the views you'd want to see. But this was definitely a case of if you have even moderate fitness, again, I would list this as the second most beautiful place I've ever been.
And now I'm curious to know which one is the first.
I knew that was coming out. I still would have to give number one to Milford Sound in New Zealand. So amazing. But there are some similarities. Just again, the greenness, the dramatic mountain peaks that soar up. In fact, New Zealand in a lot of ways is similar to Iceland. Iceland is a little raw, and you're not going to find a whole lot of trees or forests in Iceland. But again, this spot, Mulayufur, was one of those gems that I'm so glad I did my research ahead of time. And I'm happy to share it here because I would love for others to get to enjoy. I felt just one of the best scenes in my entire trip.
Hmm.
I even
Is the
put a little on my YouTube channel. I put a little video together of it because it was that mesmerizing.
Yeah, for sure. If it's the second most, like it's your top two in the world, then definitely.
It's saying a lot for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Is the picture in your background from the canyon?
No, this isn't the canyon at all. This picture behind me, this was just the side of the road. I live in Texas. This would be the most beautiful spot in Texas. Along the coast, it's generally flatter with a lot of grassland. You'll find a lot of sheep. This the grazing. And then in the interior, it gets very mountainous. So yeah, just this was just outside the town of Vik. So if you were heading into
Ah, okay.
Vik and had a drone, this is what it looked like. I should mention this though, just regarding this. Now, one of the things that had drawn me to Iceland was watching the videos I saw on social media, the YouTube of some of the drone footage. In recent times, at the main attractions, running a drone is not permitted, which is a bummer. So I tried to take it places where it was permitted. There'll be a little symbol with a drone and an X through, but like Skogafoss, Gullfoss, Siljalandafoss, you're not allowed
Not
to do
done.
that. So just keep that in mind. You might have to just rely on to get those
Yeah.
shots. You might just have to climb high.
So that is why it was even more important for you to find these offbeat
Yes, you know what?
attractions.
I guess you could say that because this is a landscape that is just beautiful. At least in September, extremely green. This is before the snows have come. The mountains aren't as snow-capped as they'll be other times of the year. This is end of the summer into their
Yeah.
beginning fall. So it really was the kind of thing you want to get a nice aerial view of. So after that's when we went across to Thingvellir and went to the Sneffelsnes Peninsula. We only had one night in the area, and this is why I wish I had more time because the weather can change. We were having great weather the whole time, but the one day we had for the Sneffelsnes Peninsula it was extremely windy and rainy, almost hurricane strength. I tried to pump gas, I almost got blown away. The clouds were so low, you could not see everything. It was rainy. It was so low, you wouldn't even know you were looking at a volcano. So we missed out on some spectacular scenery, but that was the day we had. So we could. You're definitely going to want to bring clothing that can handle wet weather because at any time, storms can come up, especially if you're near the coast. Winds will be a factor. So having an outer layer, a shell that's water resistant, not just a jacket, but like pants and a hat, something that's going to be able to handle the water because there's a really high possibility at some point on your trip you're going to get wet. And if you wait for it to be perfect weather, you might miss out. So sometimes you gotta just barrel through. And having that type of clothing, not only does it give you an added layer, which is important too, because that's the best way to plan for a trip to Iceland, because the weather can fluctuate so much. Having layers and having a nice waterproof shell on the outside, the weather's not going to stop you from most things.
That's a really good tip. So that one day that you had, then were you able to venture out at all, or did you have to stay indoors?
No, we ventured out, but like I said, it was like we were along the coast and the wind was whipping so hard. It was really a little tricky to enjoy it. Some of the scenery was mostly covered by clouds. So we did it.
Visibility was impacted, so you didn't see that much.
And I should mention this too. This would be a good segue for it. One of the reasons I wanted to go that time of year is I wanted to be able to see the Northern Lights. That was something I wanted. And we were able to see them, but you're rolling the dice because if it has to be a combination of magnetic storms, sunstorms hitting the ionosphere, along with a clear night. You might be getting one without the other. You might have a clear night and no storms, or plenty of colors, but it's all blocked off by the clouds. We did get to see them with the naked eye. The colors weren't very intense. You saw the shifting. You saw something going on. Not as much as you would in the winter months, though, not as bright. Now, with the camera, I was able to capture the colors better, but it was still just something to see. But remember that the weather is going to impact your Northern Lights viewing because you just don't know. In fact, there are free apps that will allow you to track where they expect to be the best viewing on a given night.
The 10 days that you were there, how many days?
Ultimately, about
3.
three.
Okay.
Every night we're out there, just and you don't know
Is it?
when. Just there's a lot
Yeah.
of natural factors involved, but it was great to see them. If you come in the summer, you're going to have daylight way later. I guess it's possible to see them if you're staying up really late, but winter would definitely be more striking. If you were really going for that, I would say go a little later in the year, more in the colder months.
Hmm.
Some areas might be off limits because of the weather, but you'll hit it a little more strongly.
Yeah, and if you're able to endure the cold.
Yes, that's another thing too. You want to be even in September, late at night, especially on a clear night, it was pretty chilly.
You mentioned that the camera was able to capture the lights better. So do you need a special camera for it, or does an average camera also
I just
record it better than your eye?
I just use my iPhone. That's all. Put it in night
Oh.
mode. If you have a tripod, that would be preferable because when any kind of low light situation, you have to keep the camera very still. Otherwise, it's going to be blurry. If you have a tripod and you just point it up, you can get some beautiful star scenes. You can also do a time lapse and see the stars rotate or to see the whole thing going on. But a tripod, again, if this is what you're going for, you don't need a special type of camera or any kind of special filters to capture it. But again, something that will hold it still, or even if just you could prop it up on something, just not your
Hmm.
fingers, then it'll get a little shaky.
Anything apart from your hand, which is definitely going to move. I think now it's time for me to discuss the places that you stayed at a little bit. So there were 3 spots that you chose
Yes.
for your stay.
Yes. So the first one was in Borg Grims's, and that was an Airbnb that was like a dome, like a tinted dome, a
Hmm.
geometric dome. And that just drew us because it was just such an interesting type of stay.
Yeah.
It had a hot tub, which was really nice, especially in a place like Iceland, which is cold. Be able
Mhm.
to sit outside with a drink. We had a good time with that. Inside the dome, it was an interesting setup. When you walk in, there was a freestanding little structure inside. On one side was a bedroom. On one side was a living area with a TV, and the other side was a kitchen with a table. And then inside was the bathroom with a shower. On top was another bed. We were 2 couples, so my wife and I stayed on the top. Kind of a unique
Yeah.
arrangement.
So
And
did it feel big enough to accommodate 4 people?
yeah, we were fine with that. Again, you have the restroom there in the middle. If now we're good friends and we get along well, but if you're not really that close to it, it might be a little awkward, or it might be a great opportunity, depending on how you're looking at it. It also would really work well if you're a family with kids. You can just send the kids up let the kids do the climbing. And that was a
Mm.
little awkward, in the middle of the night if you have to use the restrooms and climb a ladder. And they did have at the top of the dome kind of a skylight. So if the aurora borealis was a little more intense than when we were there, I suppose it would have been pretty cool just the light filling into the space. But it was very comfortable. I'll definitely say it was
Mm.
very comfortable. And for our purposes, we really didn't spend much time there other than to sleep. And then outside, there's another great thing about Iceland, especially where we were, not much light pollution. So if the skies are clear, you're going to see it.
So pretty well attuned to spot seeing the northern lights. If they're there, then you can definitely catch a glimpse of them.
I
Yeah.
agree.
So what about meals at this accommodation? Were they available or were other outlets nearby where you could pop into?
One night we went to a little market nearby in town. I guess it's a little tiny town. We were able just to pick some stuff up. And so in the morning, we would just make bacon and eggs and just some easy breakfast, some pods for the coffee machine. There
Okay.
was a decent restaurant nearby. I should mention, Iceland's very hard to do on a budget. Food in particular is very expensive. It's really good, especially if you like anything with lamb or stews. Those were delicious, and surprisingly, the bread was actually really good. I didn't think I would be enjoying just. I've traveled in Scandinavian countries like Sweden and Norway, and the food was something I did because I needed to eat, not because I thought I'd enjoy it. Iceland was a little bit different. I enjoyed it much more than I was expecting to.
Oh, that's nice. Even though it was,
Expensive. Figure around $20 to $30 US per person for a meal, just a simple meal.
so that was the first accommodation that you were staying at the Dome.
Yes. The second one, again, this was out towards the eastern side of the south shore of Iceland in a town called Kirkin. I can't even try. It's about this long, the names. This was a cottage, just a little cottage that was situated on the banks of a little lake, had a nice porch, had really good Wi-Fi, and it was also just, it was close enough to the road to be convenient, but far
Mhm.
enough where you're not getting noise or traffic. In fact, at night it got dark, although it was cloudy, but you can see the lights of the aurora borealis. Like, it was pretty cool. And we liked that one a lot. We were only there, I want to say 2 nights. I want to say something like that, something around 2 nights, or maybe 2 or 3 nights. We had our own bedrooms. I remember there was a washer and dryer that was helpful. Just the heaters in your rooms. Like I said, you're going to get a lot of wet clothes, just the
Yeah.
nature. So that one was really nice. Our third one, it was a series of little self-contained cottages on a working horse farm. This is right at the beginning of the Sneffelsnes Peninsula. We didn't have a chance to really enjoy this too much. We were only there for 1 or 2 nights, but like one day, I think it was one day and 2 nights. But a charming little wood cabin with a bedroom up top, one bedroom on the bottom, a very comfortable living area with a kitchen and a nice porch out front, easy place to park. And that was another night we were able to look up and see the northern lights. If you're traveling as a family or as a group, these Airbnbs were just a really good value in that you had your rooms and your kitchen and your living area all together. In Iceland, again, there's not a tremendous amount of hotels, especially in some of these further corners. So having these
Mm.
kind of options was a really nice thing, and to be away from other people and just be able to enjoy it like that.
Mm. I was going to ask about this, that you mostly chose these cabin and cottage type accommodations. These were the ones which were more readily available in these smaller,
Yes, you could stay in the towns, but we came for the natural beauty.
yeah.
We wanted to be self-sufficient, and we wanted to be away from all. And each of them had their own charm, a little character to them. It wasn't just an apartment. You can just for less money, but between the dome and cottages, it just had a nicer, just more personality, more
Mhm.
character to the stay.
More, yeah, like more clued into the Icelandic landscape. That
I'd say
experience
that
ties in well, yeah,
very
because
much.
you're there to see the outdoors and you want to be surrounded by them as well.
Yes.
So even at the second and the third, the cabin and the cottage, you were also picking up meals from nearby towns, supplies, and making use of the kitchen within both of these facilities.
Yes, absolutely. For the cottage at the end, we had eaten out but there are towns nearby. Like, we were a little further out, but if you wanted to, they all had the equipment for you to cook. In fact, one night we did, I believe we got some ribs at one of the markets and decided to just eat in that night and enjoy it. Some of them had grills. I'm trying to remember if we used it or not, but to have that kind of like flexibility. Another thing to keep in mind, this is Iceland. Stores and restaurants aren't going to be open all hours of the night. So you have to do your eating within certain time periods. So this gave us the flexibility to stay out later, do what we wanted to do, just stop by a grocery store and we can just cook
Mm,
something at home. One night I whipped up some
mm.
pasta. Just,
Yeah, okay. So in the beginning, you mentioned a little bit about the food that you liked in Iceland. I would like to know a little bit more about, like what were you able to try some more Icelandic dishes, and which one of those did you like?
I was a little partial to the lamb stews. So there's a lot of sheep around and get some lamb and it was very tasty. And just frankly, because of the damp and chill of Iceland, having a nice warm stew was very enjoyable. I should also mention that they are really big on their coffee. They love their coffee over there. So you're never far from some decent coffee and even just a nice hot chocolate. Some of those days, like back from a hike, and oh, this is just really
Yeah, ties in well with the cold weather. Any warm beverage.
exactly. We
Yeah.
understand the need for it. Just something to warm you up from the inside. It gets a little
Okay.
chilly.
So coffee and lamb were your go-to when you were there.
I would say that, but you could get other types of food there. There's not much in the way of fast food,
Mm.
but you could get other things. What I appreciated the most was more the local foods, particularly the lamb-based ones. Was very tasty.
And you were trying them out at these restaurants in the small towns that you were.
Yeah, but it really all depended on where we were that day. You have to, because it's not like some countries that are so developed, you have just options wherever you go. Some,
Mm.
we went out to Giant, there's nothing over there. So you were like, okay, we got to eat lunch before we even go over there. I should
Mm.
mention that most, probably about all of the visitor centers we went to, except for maybe one, have a cafe. Some of them are really good. They're used to handling the tour buses and things like that. And we found these were good options, especially
Mm.
for lunch, because we're already visiting these places. Let's
Right.
just eat something here before we go
Mm.
out, and there's not going to be anything there.
That's quite thoughtful of them to have those cafes at visitor centers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's helpful.
So I know the conversation has covered some tips already, but if I ask you, like, what would be your tips for people visiting Iceland? What would be your top three or five that you would share with them?
Sure. Well, especially if this is your first time to Iceland. A lot of people go into Reykjavik, and if you like city life, that's pretty much the only place you're going to find it in Iceland. But there are much more impressive cities to visit. So I wouldn't spend a lot of time in Reykjavik. Find a base of operations somewhere in an area of sites you want to see. And that's just a really nice way. I would
Mm.
definitely recommend, even though it's expensive, renting a car. Having that freedom gives you so much more flexibility with your itinerary, with your timing, and allow you to get to some of these more off the beaten path locations. I would definitely recommend bringing layers. So if you have a good base layer, something that's going to trap the heat to you, then something like a fleece or a puffy jacket, and then a waterproof shell, you pretty much can handle most, unless you're coming in the dead of winter. But you should be able to get by with that. I should also mention shoes that can handle getting wet. Comfortable hiking type shoes. Don't wait till you get there to break them in. Break them in ahead of time
Mm.
and make sure they can handle a little bit of water and mud. If you're doing anything outdoors, you're going to get some of that. They
Mm.
haven't paved its paradise yet. It's still pretty raw. I would also recommend judging from the reaction of the local people. They're very nice by nature, very friendly. But I can see there's some frustration from tourists who are oblivious. Even one time I felt bad. I did something. I didn't realize there was a sign saying I shouldn't do it. And I was like, oh, I am so sorry. Don't push their hospitality. Just try to be respectful and polite. I imagine if I went to the store and there was like crowds of tourists, that would bother me when I'm trying to do my food shopping. So just be polite and be a mindful and respectful tourist. You don't want to be one that they're gonna be telling their neighbors about. Just respect. They have a beautiful place. They're sharing their beautiful country with you, and just try to be courteous of that.
So throughout our conversation today, we have struggled a lot with the Icelandic names. Did you struggle with the language while you were there? Did it pose a challenge for you?
Fortunately, for me at least, I don't think we encountered anyone that doesn't also speak English. The signs will be in English, with the exception of at certain points in certain towns, they will have cameras for a speed trap if you're driving over the speed limit. All the other signs in the country will also be in English, but not those ones. Sign will say speed camera, but unless you read Icelandic and can
Mm.
understand 27 letters jumbled together, they'll get you. But for the majority, especially if you're anywhere that tourists go, where there's a visitor center or restaurants that here, they'll speak English, and some might even speak other languages. So language was never a problem. It's just in my recounting, that's the problem. I'm trying to see where I was. Like, I can't even tell you.
Okay, so that's good that, if English is good to get by while you're there, then that's good. Yeah. But the names are definitely tricky to sort of recall and remember.
There, like any other language, there's a rhythm to it. So you'll see certain words like appear in more than one place. So like the word, when you see FOSS, that means FOSS, that's falls. JARA, that means beach. So whatever it is, you gotta, so you can get a sense of the
Mm.
language, even though there's a lot of things that just, I don't even know if my tongue moves that way.
Yeah, those were all good tips that you shared with us. My last question is about, did you pick up any souvenirs while you were there, or anything that you brought back from Iceland with you?
Not really. Did get a headband that said Iceland just to cover my ears one day. This T-shirt I actually made myself. I have the graphic arts that design. If you were getting souvenirs, they're going to be pricey.
Hmm.
If you don't already have some kind of good outdoor gear, it's pricey, but you can find it there. There's wool products. You'll find lots of plush puffins and other. And for jewelry wise, you'll have very Nordic type of designs. So
Hmm.
that's something like a lot of scroll work and silver jewelry. So that's a good place
Oh.
for picking like that.
So you didn't bring any, but those are good suggestions of if someone wants to pick up some souvenirs from Iceland.
My souvenirs are my pictures, memories.
I
I
thought you
spent the
would
money on
mention
my
those.
food, food and activities.
So that was a great discussion on Iceland today with you. Thank you so much for joining me and sharing about your trip. It was a pleasure to speak to you. I hope our viewers will find this information useful and it will help them plan their trips too.
Sounds great.
Yeah. So with that, we will sign off for today. Bye bye.